I'm going to go ahead and give it another minute as folks transition to this other meeting before we start. Okay, so Desiree, are we ready?
Yes, the recording has started.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on AO 2020-21, amending AMC Chapter 3.80, Civil Emergency. Can we go ahead and do a roll call?
Miss Allard.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Miss Kennedy.
Here.
Miss LaFrance. I see Miss LaFrance.
Did you call me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, Miss LaFrance here.
Okay. Mr. Perez-Verdia. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson. Here. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Waddleton.
Here.
Miss Zalatel.
Here.
And then one more time, Mr. Perez-Verdia. I believe we have everybody but Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Okay, thank you. So just like we've been doing recently, if you want to get in the queue, either put yourself in the chat or text me. So for this work session, Mr. Falsey is going to be doing a short overview of the ordinance and issues since we haven't really looked at this for a little bit. I want to spend the majority of our time, though, talking about the amendments. And I want to be really clear here. We're not really here to deliberate. We're here to ask any informational questions and explore any potential issues that may come up because of these amendments. But otherwise, the deliberation should be left for the floor on the 19th. That is the more appropriate place for us to do that. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Falsey.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is Ordinance 2020-21, which we introduced way back in a simpler time in February of 2020. Back when we thought this was leftover homework from the earthquake. And so the chair asked me just to remind ourselves how this all began. The ordinance was really trying to address 4 things that we thought were leftover homework assignments from the November 2018 earthquake. The first was we wanted to make sure that there was always somebody who had the ability to exercise the mayor's emergency powers. Second, that when we actually had to step through our civil emergency code, we found a lot of really old references to notices that had to be placed on the municipal bulletin board and things of that sort. Also some gendered references where it referred to the mayor as a him. Then next, the state law has always said that a local emergency declaration expires in 7 days on its own accord, Mission Impossible style. It self-destructs in 7 days. Our code has said that it self-destructs in 24 hours unless the assembly extends it, although the assembly can always turn it off whenever it wants to. In practice, that was a little bit of a challenge in the actual earthquake because we had an earthquake and a declaration on the morning of Friday, so we had to find everybody on Sunday. And then finally, the Office of Emergency Management has always had the sort of under-codified duties, and so we thought this was a time that we could step through and give a little bit more color to what the Office of Emergency Management is actually doing in practice. And so in the ordinance, you can see those 4 things are all addressed. The first section just picks up the Office of Emergency Management and attempts to write down all the things that it is actually doing and that we expect it to be doing. It has been a particular number of questions generated as a result of that, or particular questions. The real conversation has been around the assumption of emergency powers during a temporary absence of the mayor. And we proposed this order of succession. and then to clean up what happens if the mayor is permanently gone. And we can step into that because I think it's going to take the bulk of the time. And those are two very different scenarios. The bulletin board, we attempted to clean up here by just deleting it and saying that we're going to provide notice that's more or less effective to the radio stations throughout the municipality. And then here we had proposed the 7-day change. All of that was attempted to be described in this memorandum where we described how we're trying to get mayoral powers to be constantly exercisable, to clean up the definition of what the Office of Emergency Manager is doing, removing some of that gendered language, removing the bulletin board, and then the 7-day change here. I think that's by way of quick introduction. That did precipitate a lot of questions, mostly dealing with the order of succession. And I think that is also going to be prompted by amendment number 4, which has been introduced. So, Mr. Chair, let me know how you'd like to proceed. Do you want me to walk through each of these 4 amendments and have invite the conversation, or what is your preference?
Yeah, let's go ahead and have you walk through them, and then I do think, though, we should likely spend most of the time on the Kennedy, Weddleton, Rivera amendment. I think that's probably where most of the discussion will occur.
Okay, and so we did have one other work session where we talked about a few of these items. So this first amendment, introduced by Assembly members Constant and Weddleton, would say, I understand the proposal for 7 days, maybe 2 is too short, but how about instead we do 72 hours? And thereupon, that I would say, as we said last time, it ultimately is somewhat for the Assembly to decide. Our preference had been to go to the 7 days allowed in the state because it gives us maximum flexibility to attend to whatever the actual emergency has been, if a significant wildfire or significant earthquake. And really, there shouldn't be a whole lot of difference to the Assembly, because remember what the rest of this provision has always said. Termination of emergency proclamation, the emergency proclamation that the mayor issues terminates on its own or whenever the Assembly says that it should be turned off. And that can happen 1 minute after the mayor issues it. So like I said last time, I don't think this is a hill we're going to die on. But the Assembly always has total control regardless of whatever this says, whatever this number is. You can turn off the emergency proclamation instantaneously, or you can wait for it to expire on its own accord. Right now that's 2 days. We propose 7. Here we have a 72-hour proposal. Do you want me to stop for the questions that are appearing in the queue, or just to introduce all 4 of these amendments?
Yeah, we'll stop after each amendment. So, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, and I just think that the substantive question isn't whether we have the power to turn it off or turn it on, but that the fear of a different administration coming forward and just bullying their way through and charging forward and not including people. So the idea of this is to allow some more flexibility, but also to ensure that the administrations going forward in the future understand that we are partners in this process, not just nuisances to be addressed in a week.
Thank you. Ms. Allard?
Yeah, okay, so if I'm on the wrong spot or something, just kind of realign me there, Chairman, because I'm still on here learning thing. But I have a question. I'm not really sure why this is. I understand some of the things that Mr. Falsey said about changing him, her, and those type of things and minor changes, but I'm a little bit concerned, and maybe we're not there yet. I'm trying to follow along of why we're even discussing the order of who would be in charge of incapacitation, only because this is already in code.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you want me to take a stab at that.
Yeah, if you could.
I apologize. I forgot that we began this conversation before all the current Assembly members had even been seated. So that's right. So when we were in the earthquake, we were exercising our codified civil emergency code in force, really kind of for the first time. And one of our many after action items was to take a look at how that code worked in practice. So some of these little things, the automatic termination, whether you put the notice on a bulletin board or somewhere else, were just cleanup items. But the big one seemed to us that the way our charter is currently structured, it is not clear who is supposed to get the mayor's emergency powers if the mayor is not permanently gone, but is only temporarily gone. So we had proposed a way to address that gap back in early February, before we thought it was ever going to be necessary, and then we found ourselves in the middle of this COVID emergency. So we have, and maybe I will give it here. And this is the fourth amendment. So maybe the best way to do this would be to go 1, 2, 3, and then pick it up in 4.
I apologize. Right. Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, were there other questions on number 1, or should I go to 2?
Go ahead. Move on to the second one. I don't see any other questions.
Okay. Number 2, we have Assembly members Weddleton, Rivera, and Kennedy, who say, actually, this old dissemination and posting of emergency proclamation provision, which I think dates back to the 70s, could be further improved. So just about all of the bold-faced text is changed by this amendment, and it says now that not just a proclamation of the emergency, but anything that continues the proclamation of the emergency or that terminates the emergency should itself be put out, should be noticed and disseminated. And here, instead of having hardwired rules, we'd say should be disseminated promptly by means calculated to bring its contents to the attention of the general public and sent to the state. I think that's perfectly fine amendment. I don't. I will pause here to let any of the sponsors add whatever additional color they would like to add.
Sure, just 2 things. So just want to note that we've been joined by Mr. Perez-Verdia, and then I have a question from Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it the intent of the sponsors of this amendment that this would also include emergency orders issued under an emergency proclamation?
I will defer to either Mr. Weddleton or Ms. Kennedy on that one.
This is Crystal Kennedy. My comment on that would be, yes, I believe it would be all of those things. I can't speak for the other 2 members, but my thought is that it's anything that has to do with the emergency proclamation, whatever that is. So definitely it doesn't specifically say that it would exclude that. So maybe we need a legal opinion on it. But to me, the proclamation of an emergency would be the declaration of emergency as well as the emergency order. Thanks.
Weddleton agrees with that after finding his mute button.
Thanks. And Mr. Gates, did you want to add in as well?
Yes, I thank you. So I helped draft this when I saw that the state statute had language that was more contemporary than what we had in our code for the dissemination. I actually didn't view it as applying to each emergency order or regulation issued during the state of emergency, but rather to just the proclamation declaring the emergency, the extensions of it, and the termination of it. So I think if the sponsor's intent is to have it apply to each individual order and regulation that's issued during the emergency, that this language needs to be updated to include that. I guess I would caution, though, the way it's worded now, you'd probably want to split it up into 2 subsections, one with what is before us, and subsection B about dissemination of the emergency orders and regulations. And one concern is that this says that they're effective, shall become effective upon its issuance to the Assembly. And the orders and regulations actually have effective times or dates that are from the mayor so far as we've seen in the current emergency, or maybe a bit later than the time it's actually sent and so forth. So you'd want language to say effective at the time it's issued to the Assembly or as stated in the order or regulation. Anyways, I think that if we're going to incorporate the intent that Mrs. Kennedy and Mr. Weddleton just expressed, that we need to edit this a little bit.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anyone else in the queue on this amendment, so let's go ahead and move on to the third one.
All right, number 3, another Weddleton, Rivera, and Kennedy suggestion. Right now, civil emergency is defined the way it has always been defined, and this would add a public health emergency, which is a kind of emergency that didn't exist until recently, at least not in explicit form. So again, that seems like good housekeeping, and we don't have any problem with that. Don't see any questions, so I will keep going to the bigger topic, and I think here it's probably best for me to let one of the sponsors speak to this proposed amendment number 4. But I'm happy to drive around and play Vanna White to the best extent that I can.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. I'll go ahead and ask and again defer to one of the other sponsors, either Ms. Kennedy or Mr. Weddleton.
Ms. Kennedy, you want to have at it?
I guess while we're waiting to see who wants to start, I could offer a little bit of table setting, especially since it's been a while since we looked at this, and share one other thing, which is our current charter rules. Just to remind ourselves that the charter has always had rules about vacancies and about the temporary absence of the mayor. So Charter Section 7 here has said if an office becomes vacant, if someone ceases to be qualified for the job, if they've resigned, if they've died, if they've been judicially determined to be incompetent, if they've been convicted of a felony, or they've breached the public trust. And there's a whole process for how you can remove someone for breaching the public trust. As to the mayor, this next section, filling vacancies in elective office, has always said a real, no kidding, the mayor's gone forever vacancy in the office of the mayor has to get filled by an election. But while that's happening, the chair of the assembly serves as acting mayor until a successor or elected until successor is elected and take office. They have the veto power, but they can't vote on an assembly action. So that gives us a pretty clear rule about what happens to the mayor's powers if the mayor is one of these things: dead, has resigned, is judicially determined to be forever incompetent. But the gap that we were trying to fill is what happens if the mayor is just temporarily gone. And the charter issue has been silent, or at least ambiguous, about that. The general provision says the municipal manager assumes all powers of the mayor in the temporary absence of the mayor, except veto and emergency powers. It is unclear why emergency powers were exempted. That's not the way it was in the city. That's the way it was proposed in the failed municipal charters in the 70s, but there's no legislative history that can illuminate that. Different from some of the other models that we are aware of, the state has, for instance, said that the power of the governor to declare an emergency can pass to the commissioner of the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, or at least that was the initial state that.
Mr. Falsey, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just getting a couple of notes from folks. They're having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe, all right. I'm not sure how to fix that. I will get, I think, a little bit closer to the computer. Sorry about that. I'll wrap it up and let other people jump in as well. But that's the issue. So we're trying to figure out what happens if the mayor is temporarily unavailable. Mayor Grand Canyon has decided that she's going to take an 18-day trip down the Colorado River. She brings her satellite phone. The satellite phone has fallen in the water. We know the mayor is coming back, but no one can reach her. And then the wildfire comes on the hillside. Who declares the emergency? Who issues orders to set up an emergency shelter? That's the scenario that we were interested in addressing. And our proposal in the ordinance had been to say that should go to the municipal manager to the same way that all the other powers pass the municipal manager in the temporary absence of the mayor, unless the municipal manager is lawfully not entitled to do that or unavailable, in which case then there should be an order of succession, and we propose an order of succession. So with that, I'll turn it over to the amendment number 4 and bring that one back on the screen.
Thanks. All right, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Ms. Kennedy, and then we'll have the discussion on this amendment. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I hesitate to say too much because I don't want it to be perceived as being debating the issue, but I will talk a little bit about my reason for supporting this amendment and kind of the rationale behind that. I think one of the important things that was brought up was the idea that typically in a lot of governance structures, there is a vice chair, there's a vice president, there's a lieutenant governor. There is already an elected second in command. And we don't have that at the mayor level in the municipality of Anchorage, as you all know. But I think what that elected official role is so important that that's really the thing that we need to focus on and really pay attention to, is the fact that keeping this emergency power at the level of an elected official is really the priority here. And I say that because to a certain extent, we can certainly declare an emergency like we have for the MLK fire. And in that situation, you're really deploying assets for an immediate emergency. But and that's important, so I'm not trying to diminish the importance of that by any means. But when we've looked at the emergency that we're under right now, that has been a very long emergency, a very, very highly impactful. It's almost like it's an emergency to the nth degree. And if we want to start to declare a certain level of emergency and say that simple emergency would go to the municipal manager, maybe that's another discussion. But if we're looking at just this role, this power of declaring an emergency, I just firmly believe that needs to remain in the hands of an elected official. So the fact that we already have this succession plan, that when the mayor vacates, if a mayor ever vacates the office, there is a succession where it goes to the assembly chair. And because of the degree of importance and significance of a power of emergency, I think we need to maintain that same kind of succession. So that's kind of my whole reason for pursuing this particular amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have a couple folks in the queue for questions. Ms. Allard?
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess my concern is that by reading the code and everything that's already in line, it's all in there. It clearly states if he dies, if he's incapacitated, where the chain of command and where everything lies. So I'm just sort of not confused, just bewildered why it's coming up for a discussion. I mean, it clearly states that if it ceases, like resigns, dies, determined incompetent, convicted of a felony, it does go to an elected official, which would be the chair. And one of the examples would be when Baggage, even though he vacated, Matt Clayman came into play. And that's a recent event. And my other question would be, if the mayor doesn't have faith in his city manager, then why would he have Falsey as his city manager? So that's just my stand on trying to figure out the amendment. And then I'll just close up because I don't want it to appear as if it's a debate either. It's just, I'm a little confused. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can offer a little bit of clarification. So I pulled up here the charter provision. That's right. So the charter is very clear about what happens if the mayor is gone and never coming back. And the charter is somewhat clear about what happens if the mayor is gone but is coming back. And the rule there is this one that lives in the manager section. During the temporary absence or incapacity of the mayor, the manager shall assume the powers and duties of the mayor, except emergency and veto powers. So that's what we're trying to address. If the mayor is temporarily absent or incapacitated, who gets those emergency powers? And our proposal had been to say, we will pass it as we have proposed here, where it would go, oh, sorry, I gotta share this one again. It would pass to the manager, and then if the manager is unable to do that, it would go OMB, fire, health, M&O, etc. The rival proposition that Assemblymember Kennedy has described is no, it should pass to an elected official. I think we do have some practical concerns about how that would really happen in the scenario like I was describing earlier of mayor Grand Canyon being on the Colorado River somewhere, and we know she's coming back, but we can't reach her for 3 more days. But I'm happy to describe those. The other observation I will make is that this amendment, as currently drafted, is not limited to just emergency powers. So the way it was drafted, I will just observe, if the mayor is incapacitated or temporarily absent for less than 14 days, then the mayor's emergency powers go to the chair of the assembly, then the vice chair, and everything else goes to the municipal manager and then the other executives. But then the way it's drafted is if it's 14 days or more, then all of the mayor's powers and duties go chair of the assembly, vice chair. I will just observe it sort of beyond the original scope for whatever that's worth. And I do have some concerns that could lead to some mischief or confusion. And I wouldn't understand why, for instance, if we were in the middle of union negotiations on the 15th day, when the mayor Grand Canyon is coming back on the 18th day, the chair might jump in and conclude all the union negotiations as the assuming the powers of the mayor on day 15, 16, and 17. That sort of seems bigger than I think what was probably originally intended.
All right, thank you. I just want to turn it back to Ms. Allard. Did that clarify the purpose of the ordinance, Ms. Allard, or do you still have any questions?
Yeah, that's just fine. I just think that not when you, so with my federal experience, when you read a code or a policy or a regulation, there's always a follow-up to that code, regulation, and policy. And when you take a small portion of that code, regulation, or policy out of context, it makes no sense. So okay. No, I don't agree with what he said.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, thanks. A couple points on the context is you do have to read all of our code in the context of the charter, and that's kind of where the hole is. And so we're writing some code to fill that hole. I think agree with what Crystal said about the importance of having an elected official hold the emergency powers. And I think, you know, she's right. This COVID-19 event has really highlighted how it became very politicized, and so the importance of that. But you know, it's also you know, it parallels what happens when the mayor is missing. When the mayor, or not missing, when the mayor is totally gone from the job, then until another one is elected, the vice chair goes up. So it seems odd if even it's a short time, for a few weeks, that you know, you would not go that route. If there's trouble with doing it for the short term, it seems like it's not any more than there would be, you know, if the mayor were tomorrow simply gone, you know, couldn't do his job. The vice chair or the chair moving up to that role until there's an election would be, I'm sure it was challenging for Mr. Clayman. And, but, you know, it's just something we deal with. They have an elected person fill these elected positions. So that's kind of a second reason for doing this. And I believe in Mr. Falsey's point about the 14 days or more, I think the intent there was to tie it in because that's about the time where it becomes a permanent replacement, but that's not really clear here. So I think that is something to take another closer look at. So appreciate that. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just mention a couple of things. One was how Mr. Fossey said this section is not entirely about emergency powers, and I agree. And actually, the way this section currently reads in code, it doesn't mention emergency powers in this section, and it sort of made sense though because they're referring to, I guess, that might occur during an emergency for some reason or another. But this section was enacted in 1976, I guess, probably taken from our previous City of Anchorage or Greater Anchorage Area Bureau Code. Anyways, I wanted to mention this because, and I believe I might have mentioned this previously, that because of the amendments and this extending not just to emergency situations, that this whole section should probably be somewhere else in code rather than chapter 380. But as it is, we're working with what we have and amending it here. And I just thought that though in general it's misplaced, it should be in probably chapter 270 or maybe in chapter 320 about the office of mayor. And that's just some thoughts about that. And then a second thing I wanted to mention, the 14 days is sort of an arbitrary selection for a time period between a short temporary absence and a longer period of incapacity or absence. Whether not succession might make a difference between acting quickly and then acting in a longer term on a day-to-day basis, at least until the office of mayor is declared vacant. And then, as we've recognized, we already have a succession for an actual declared vacancy in the office of the mayor. So the 14 days isn't meant to be an ongoing permanent thing. This all would terminate once the office of mayor is formally declared vacant, according to the charter section that Mr. Fossey pulled up earlier.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gates. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Gates, for the explanation there, because there is a lot of other detail in this. But I guess I just want to say that to me, the effort behind this amendment was to really address those gaps that in a specific situation, which we have all kinds of potential situations that we could name that this might apply in, but this is a gap that isn't covered currently in the charter or in the code. And so this is a way of addressing that. And the other thing I want to say is I do believe that any assembly member, whoever, whether it is the permanent absence or the temporary absence of the mayor, whoever would step into that position of then being acting mayor, I believe would be fully cooperative with the municipal manager. And that relationship would really be very similar to what the relationship between the mayor and the municipal manager is, and would function in that same way. Should that be the newest situation. I can't imagine an assembly member trying to function independently of anything in the Muni administration's capability that they wouldn't really be able to function well together. I mean, they would definitely be relying on each other. So it's not about trying to take on a responsibility that an assembly member would have no expertise in. It would absolutely be a reliant one. But again, the idea is that the weightiness, the responsibility of doing something as dramatic and as drastic as putting forward an emergency order should be in the hands of an elected official. So thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Kennedy. And so before I go on to the queue, so I think the goal for the remainder of the time that we have, because I do think that, this particular amendment is going to be likely the biggest discussion point, is any clarifying questions folks have on this amendment or any legal issues that may arise from adoption of this amendment. I think I want to get all of those on the table now to allow us to better have a deliberation on the 19th. So I'll go ahead and move on to Mr. Constant.
Thank you. That last conversation raised concern for me that exists only in this condition of, in the absence of the mayor temporarily, not absence of the mayor in general, or the kind of how that process would work. But it dawns on me, what if you were to have a situation where you had a strongly oppositional assembly, you had a mayor that disappeared for whatever reason for 10 days, the chair became the acting mayor because of this emergency power, and then just decided to fire the whole administrative team, the executive team. I seem to imagine, and this is like a bunch of bad faith actors in action, so it's not reality really, because what we've seen consistently is people in this municipality work together. But what happens in a case where you have a temporary person filling a position and they decide to do something outside of the scope of the emergency because we've suddenly granted them all of that power? I think that raises a bunch of catacombs of questions for me.
Thank you. Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you. So one legal issue I thought, or distinction I thought I wanted to point out here is between having an executive assume the mayor's powers in absence and an elected official assume the powers in the mayor's absence. One difference is that an executive can be subject to a recall petition by the voters. So if there's some and the grounds for a recall, and I'm sorry, it's probably not the best subject, or it's a sore point to bring up, but I think I need to do so. The grounds for a recall are misconduct in office, incompetence, or failure to perform prescribed duties. Well, you can't do that, and voters couldn't do a recall petition for an executive assuming emergency powers and abusing their position, or doing it incompetently. And I'm not saying anybody we know would do that, but that's just a fact of the matter. They wouldn't be subject to a recall. While if an elected official assumes the mayor's emergency powers or non-emergency powers in some short-term absence, and they bungle it badly and are incompetent, they're subject to a recall petition by the voters. So that's accountability to the voters, or the voters being able to or the voters being empowered by that accountability is through recall, I think. And that's just one factor to consider in the difference between giving this power to executives or elected officials. I think it's a significant difference.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, having trouble pushing buttons. You know, I appreciate that. And that is one of the reasons why I also, you know, continue to support this amendment. I think the scenario that Mr. Constant was talking about can exist no matter what. And I don't know that this actually keeps anything like that from happening. Again, it goes back to the expectation that the assembly and the municipal manager are going to be working through this emergency. But, you know, we don't even have that kind of a guarantee right now in the emergency that we're under right now. But my question would be, for Mr. Gates was bringing up the fact that at least within an elected official, the public has a remedy to, you know, they have the ability to have a recall, or even though that's very time consuming and for the most part would probably not be able to happen before the mayor returned to assume his position. But what legal liability could a municipal manager be in if he or she is functioning in that role of mayor for that particular kind of emergency power? Is there any kind of a concern about the municipality's liability if the role is actually being taken on by somebody that's not an elected official? Do we have any grounds for being worried about that? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if you're calling on someone, we can't hear you.
Whoever from the administration wants to respond.
This is Kate Vogel. On the legal liability issue, no, I think the same rules on liability would apply so long as it was a lawful designation. i.e. fixing this in code tells the government where that the action is proper. I think there's more sort of liability and uncertainty created by not having someone have the ability to exercise the power, so the gap that is being spoken of. But generally, the liability issues are going to be about sort of discretionary immunity. So I guess I don't see one way or the other this as a liability issue. And there is obviously a number of governments that have the emergency powers taken by non-elected officials, and the state of Alaska is one of those, where third in line, I think, at least by statute, I think I'm remembering that it's a designee. So there are some examples. I don't think that it's a legal liability question.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Gates, did you have any additional thoughts?
I would just add that I agree with Ms. Vogel that a liability issue, it's not really relevant here to this. It would be more determined based on specific facts, and there's discretionary immunity for the municipality regardless of who was in the captain's seat or mayor, acting mayor, or so forth. And then I wanted to add, I guess, a general comment about how this is being structured, and we can compare to how it's structured with the state of Alaska and their succession, or other municipalities and their succession. I had done a little research, and it appears to me, though, that this is purely something that is determined by the municipality, how we want to set out our line of succession. And there's no, like, I didn't find any controlling law saying it has to be this way or that way. And so whether we decide it would be an elected official or the municipal manager or other executive and so forth, I think it's purely a decision at our level, the local level. And that's something I got from reading municipal law treaties and some state statutes. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead, go back in the queue for any additional questions that folks might have. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, thanks. So, I think a strong case has been made for having an elected official fill that role instead of have the emergency powers. But the kind of somewhat arbitrary 14 days is in there. So I just wanted to get both Dean's and Mr. Falsey's or Ms. Vogel's thoughts on where that section A, to say if the mayor is temporarily absent or incapacitated, the chair or this line of succession would take place until the mayor either returns or is declared permanently gone. I mean, does that make it more acceptable to you, more solve some of the problems? So that goes to Dean, Kate, and Bill.
This is Dean. Well, since I drafted this and I pretty much came up with 14 days, I thought I might answer first and welcome Mr. Falsey and Mrs. Vogel's comments as well. So I thought 14 days made a little bit of sense just because that's a typical time period between assembly meetings. So if the chair needs to assume some of the mayor's powers, there's time to reorganize in between, or there's time for the assembly to, I guess, figure out how we're going to shift things around. It just seemed to me also a good difference between what might be a temporary absence due to illness or a vacation, and a longer absence that's really due to unavailability or capacity for other reasons. So it's really just a time that made sense to me, but I welcome other ideas for a better time frame than 14 days.
Yeah, and this is Bill. I think the question of where the emergency powers go is this live jump ball policy question. I I'm still struggling a little bit to understand the logic behind all the rest of the powers transferring. So there, I mean, the charter does say that in the temporary absence or incapacity of there, the manager has the powers. The amendment as it's drafted, I think, would allow you to get into the Chris Constant scenario if you have a very hostile chair, they show up and they just fire everybody. That I'm not sure that's even compatible with the way the charter is written now. It seems like the reason it's coming up, though, is because the Assembly is groping for what happens if the mayor is just sort of out of commission and we're not sure if the mayor is coming back or not. Like at some point, this temporary absence probably is a permanent absence. We got to figure that out. That might just already be attended by the regular rules on vacancies. At some point, I mean, I assume I can just sort of spitballing now, but at some point you've been gone, no one can find you, and at that point, I think the Assembly just removes you for just not doing your job, and then the mayor is never coming back. And so at that point, the chair of the Assembly, as acting mayor, should take the helm and should be able to hire and fire. There's no scenario where the old mayor returns. So I guess that's a way of answering the question in two different ways, which is I think we still do have concerns about the emergency powers, the practicality of them being exercised by an Assembly member in the middle of an emergent situation. But even more, I think, looking at all the rest of the powers seems like it has moved us to a whole different conversation.
Yeah, and this is Kate Vogel, if I can jump in. One of the problems with the 14 days is that it's true that an Assembly meeting would normally fall at some point during the 14 days, but it's not at all clear that it would fall at the end of the 14 days, or that the moment that you have the Assembly meeting, you understand that the incapacity is going to last 14 days. So to me, it's not clear that that there's going to be that sort of classic moment right at 14 days where the Assembly's already meeting, where they know to elect a new chair, for example, to have someone come in. And that more likely, if you were to trigger this provision, you'd probably want an emergency Assembly meeting to reorganize the Assembly. And then, yeah, I guess I think depending on what the absence is, you run into a potential lawsuit liability with transferring the other powers of the mayor, and I think it would be situation specific. I have trouble saying 15 days is automatically something that gets you out of the charter language giving those powers to the municipal manager. So I think you might have some legal challenge if this situation were to arise.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Weddleton?
No, thank you. Those are very helpful answers.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, did you leave already? Okay, looks like he left already. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just a little informational side note. As liaison to the Alaska Municipal League, I've become aware that some cities and boroughs around the state are set up to elect a vice mayor. And I'm not suggesting that we do that, because it would probably take a charter amendment. But that, that's how this is taken care of in some other places around the state. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions, rather?
Yes.
On this amendment? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Fossey's points about the amendment language not tracking the charter. And I specifically chose some language here in subsection A for the amendment. And the first line is tracks the charter exactly when it says temporarily absent or incapacitated. That tracks the charter. It says for less than 14 days. And the charter doesn't define temporary. And can temporary be 2 months, 3 months? I mean, that doesn't seem very temporary in this sort of world to me. So what this does is implement some definition to what temporary is and what it isn't. And so the second sentence that's uses different language in subsection A again. If the mayor is absent, unavailable, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to perform the duties of office. And some of this language is similar to what happens to cause a vacancy. The vacancy process and code, some of those grounds for declaring a vacancy require some procedures to take place, like judicially determined incompetent. How long can that take? It can be short or long. And so what this is really intended to do is give some definition to what is temporary and what's a bit more than temporary, but not yet a vacant mayor office. And I think that that would be permissible. Ms. Vogel said that might be subject to legal challenge. And it very well could. I can't say who's more right in on that point specifically.
And this is Bill. I'll say I think that's well taken and well intended. I see the logic there. I am still struggling with the scenario of just the mayor went on an 18-day float trip in Anwar or something, and the satellite phone got broken, and everybody knows they are coming back, but here we've defined temporary to per se mean an absence of less than 14 days. There, I think you can imagine the mayor's confusion arriving on day 19 and going, "What? The chair fired everyone?" And there you could probably have some problems. But I see where you were going, Dean, and I understand the logic there.
Thank you.
If I may.
Sure, Mr. Gates.
I tried to address that exact scenario in the amendment in subsection C.
Ooh, okay.
If you look down there, so whoever's assumed powers when the mayor returns, is capable again to assume the powers. Everything goes back the way it was. That's what those subsections are intended to do. So I've tried to fill that potential gap. They return on day 19, for example. Do you think that covers it, Mr. Fossey?
I think I see how that would allow the mayor, upon her return on day 19, to rehire everyone that got fired. Yes, I see that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gates. Thank you, Mr. Falsey. I'm not seeing any other discussion on this amendment. Mr. Falsey, was there anything else to go over?
No, I think that's what I knew to introduce, and look forward to the discussion on Tuesday.
Okay. Any other general questions from the members before I close this? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Then thanks, everyone. That is it for today, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.
See you later, everybody.